Whether it was time well spent or flushed right down the toilet is up for debate, but I've spent a lot of my time immersing myself in all different kinds of stories. Stories in pictures, stories in words, stories in pictures and words, not just in comics, but in film as well. I'm sure you know, but over the last few years, movie after movie has been remade. Luckily, a handful of my personal favorites have not. And every time Hollywood has chosen to remake this instead of that, it felt like I was dodging a bullet. Because some movies are so dear to me that even the thought of a remake feels like a betrayal. So here's a list of my favorite 5 movies that should not be remade.
Fucking ever.
Warriors! Come out and play!
The whole premise of The Warriors, a gang framed and hunted for murder, making their way back to Coney Island, is a violent action film very much of the era it was made in and would not play well now. Most folks would rather forget that time in American history, but it is what it was. And it produced a film that is one of the most genuinely gloriously bloodied fist-pumping ever in cinema history, impossible to replicate. And that is why The Warriors should never be remade.
It's astounding. Time is fleeting. Madness takes its toll.
At the time of its initial release, the world was not ready for the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now 40-something years later, fans from all walks of life, the world over, consider it timeless. It's a film most critics didn't get, where a couple of newlyweds find themselves with a broken-down car during a rainstorm. So they walk up to the nearest castle asking to use the phone and call a tow truck. It's right then and there that some absolutely glorious, otherworldly, sometimes musical shenanigans ensue. And those musical shenanigans are extraordinary. They rock, they roll, some even nurture the soul. Anyone could fall in love with the Rocky Horror Picture Show if they just give it a try. As charming as it is, a remake does not need to happen, like ever. It's perfect as it is. Hollywood should just make more films with the "don't dream it, be it" philosophy. That would be a great way to celebrate the glorious legacy of a musical that mixes so many genres while inspiring so many individuals to just be themselves.
They say I'm disturbed. Well, of course I'm disturbed. I mean, we're all disturbed. And if not, why not?
At its finest, film can be such a sincere form of communication. Pump Up the Volume succeeds at accurately conveying what it feels like to be among the confused, numbered clusters branded as teenager. And how important it is for them to speak their truth to power, even if they are still figuring it out. This story of a teenager who makes his own pirate radio station said everything it needed to say. Furthermore, I can tell you firsthand that it says everything a teenager really needs to hear. That's the reason that film, that life-changing, life-saving film, should never be remade.
The last thing the world needs is more killer clowns from outer space.
Some films succeed because of their budget, and some in spite of it. $1 million sounds like a lot, and it is, at least to us poor folk. But in Hollywood terms, it really isn't all that much. Especially when you set your ambitions as high as first-time director Stephen Chiodo did in 1988, when he and his brothers made Killer Klowns from Outer Space. There are so many big ideas floating around that movie, and all of them were capitalized on. And every single one of them make the movie look like it cost 10 times its budget. The horror comedy concept had been done half a dozen times by '88, but never as perfectly. It may be the simple story of an alien invasion, but the absurdity of the aliens puts it over the top. It's something that can only be shockingly funny once in a lifetime. And that is why Killer Klowns from Outer Space should never be remade.
Before this train rolls into its final destination, I have an honorable mention. Remember when I said,
Some movies are so dear to me that even the thought of a remake feels like a betrayal.
that's exactly what I meant. When I started thinking about what would be on this list, one name kept coming up. The thing is, I could make a whole video on it, and I've already done that. So, my honorable mention goes to any film with John Carpenter's name on it. Great Scott!
Filmmaking has so many moving parts that any given film can only be as good as the sum of those parts. From story to cast to director to soundtrack, Back to the Future had so much going for it. And it managed to be greater somehow. It seems to me like that movie and its sequels are magic captured on celluloid. With such a profound influence on pop culture, it's pretty hard to dispute that claim. Part of its charm is the era they went back to. It had this idealized innocence to it. At least back then, a remake would not have that luxury. If that movie were made today, Marty McFly would be going back to the year 1993. And if you somehow think that there would be anything charming about a Back to the Future film with a grunge-heavy soundtrack or the Rodney King beating as a backdrop, there is something seriously fucking wrong with you.
And that is my list. If I've done my job right, then I've sort of sold you on these 5 films, outshining any glimmer of hope Hollywood would have at getting your hard-earned cash should they attempt a remake. Thanks for watching. Take care. Watch movies.